Hi, this is Dr. Paul Riley, and here's the audio summary for transnational activism. In this class, we talked about NGOs, and in particular how NGOs have benefited from new media technologies, and thinking in particular how they may be enabling NGOs to influence policy, to influence nation states, whether this activism can actually generate change. And Lance Bennett's work in 2003 is still very relevant to this, and he defined the main characteristics of online social movements as essentially they would involve people in permanent campaigns, that communication would be very much about personal experience. People would contribute towards these NGOs with what they were experiencing firsthand in a much more fluid and network-based structure compared to top-down organisations. So similar to what we talked about last week with political parties. And the aim very much here being to influence mainstream media coverage. But within that, there are certain vulnerabilities, certain problems with this, that clearly if you have lots of thin or weak ties, that this may cause these coalitions to fracture very easily. And also the fact that they weren't ideologically driven perhaps might also be a weakness in terms of the goals and how people measured their success. We also looked at social network, and this was a sort of theory which was developed by the RAND Corporation around the Zapatista network. The Zapatistas being an insurgent guerrilla army in a rural area, Chiapas in Mexico, who in 1994 were involved in a 7-day military skirmish with the Mexican government, where NGOs essentially swarmed to this area, reported and drip-fed information out despite censorship by the Mexican government. And this information led to international pressure for the Mexican government to enter negotiations with the Zapatistas themselves. What's interesting about social networks is it does talk about conflict and crime short of military warfare, where it's about a network-based structure and essentially groups being able to organize themselves using new media, perhaps in many different continents, but also using it in a coordinated way to influence governments. The problem being with the Zapatistas, as we discussed, that clearly there's an ongoing dispute there, and to say it's been a success might not be necessarily true. However, clearly new media has enabled the Zapatistas to keep this struggle in the public eye, and in particular trying to get media coverage. The internet has been a key player in this particular process. These three networks, just briefly, were the idea that you could have a chain structure, a star structure, and all-channel network. The key thing here to look at is that they're essentially an idea of leaderless resistance, whereby if you take out one part or one cell of the structure, it can still persist. We also looked at obviously NGOs, and this is a key aspect of global activism that Bennett was talking about. And definition-wise, we looked at this operational versus advocacy network distinction. But what we concluded was that very much the idea that some NGOs were one or the other perhaps might be outdated itself. A bit like the idea of an international NGO. We now perhaps assume that NGOs are both operational and have a role as an advocacy network where they defend and promote a social cause. In particular, thinking about Greenpeace or some of the NGOs you probably know, they clearly all have different roles, but you could by and large say that most have an operational and advocacy network function. And there are ways that NGOs might benefit from it, clearly in terms of resource solicitation, thinking about how they can frame things without the media changing what they say, also mining information, getting information out to people who support them, and this very optimistic view we talked about a few weeks ago, that it could perhaps facilitate a global civil society. So how successful have they been? Well, clearly in terms of short-term campaigns, perhaps like the Nike sweatshop campaign, the anti-Nike sweatshop campaign, or these sort of campaigns have been very successful. New media has clearly played a key role in highlighting these particular grievances. But clearly the anti-war movement and Gillen and Pickrell's work on the UK and Australia speaks to this. There still was an element like the political parties with Web 1.5 where a top-down leadership were still imposing very institutional limits to what new media could be done. And also this issue, perhaps, will it really change the global status quo? Well, perhaps not, but it may yet bring pressure to bear. Just to conclude, clearly we've seen that there can be permanent low-cost campaigns which can obviously be very difficult to defeat if you're a government or someone who opposes that view, and the Zapatistas would suggest that. But clearly what we have seen here is that a short campaign with less ambitious goals may be more successful, and there may be an issue about the thinning of ideology in these particular NGOs, which may also be problematic. Thank you.